I still remember the day my sister Emily went missing like it was yesterday. It was June 5th, 2002, and everything about that morning seemed completely normal. Emily, who was 22 at the time, left for her shift at the diner around 7 a.m. She worked at Mel's on Central Avenue right off Route 66. She gave me a quick hug before walking out the door and promised we'd hang out later. "We'll grab ice cream or something," she said with a smile. That was the last time I saw her. By 8 p.m., when Emily hadn't come home, my parents started to panic. I was 14 then, and I'd never seen my mom cry like that before. She called the diner, but they said Emily had left after her shift ended at 2 p.m. My dad called the police, but you could tell they weren't exactly jumping to help. "She's an adult," one of the officers said. "She probably just needed some time alone." But that didn't sit right with any of us. Emily wasn't the type to just leave. She always told us where she was going, even if it was just down the street. Around midnight, we got a call. Emily's car had been found abandoned on a quiet stretch of Route 66 near Tijeras Canyon. My dad and I drove out there immediately. When we got to the scene, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Her car was locked, and inside were her purse, her phone, and a note. The note said, "It's better this way." My dad snatched it out of the officer's hand before I could get a good look, but I saw enough. The handwriting looked shaky, almost like she wrote it in a hurry. From that moment, everything changed. The weeks after Emily's disappearance were a blur. My mom became obsessed with calling every psychic in Albuquerque, convinced one of them would lead us to Emily. I thought it was ridiculous, but I couldn't say anything. She was just trying to hold it together. My dad, though, was different. He completely shut down. He stopped talking to reporters, avoided the police, and locked himself in the basement most days. I wasn't even allowed down there anymore, which was strange because he used to let me hang out there all the time. I'd hear weird noises coming from down there, like he was building something. But when I asked him about it, he'd just snap at me to mind my own business. I tried to keep myself busy by looking for Emily in my own way. I made flyers, posted on forums, and joined every missing person's Facebook group I could find. But no matter how hard I tried, it felt like no one cared about her case. Everyone just assumed she'd run away, even though I knew deep down that wasn't true. One night I couldn't sleep, so I went into Emily's room. It still smelled like her. Vanilla perfume and strawberry shampoo. I started going through her things, hoping I'd find some kind of clue. Tucked under her mattress, I found a small notebook. Most of it was full of doodles and random thoughts, but one page stood out. It said, "He's watching me. He always knows where I am. I can't take it anymore." My stomach dropped. I didn't know who he was, but I had a bad feeling I already knew the answer. I didn't tell my parents about the notebook. Something told me I couldn't trust anyone, not even them. It wasn't until 2021, nearly 2 decades after Emily vanished, that I realized I needed to try something new. The case had gone cold years ago, and the police weren't doing anything. My parents weren't much better. Mom had buried herself in denial, and Dad was, well, we'll get to him later. One night, while scrolling through TikTok, I came across a video about a missing persons case. It had millions of views, and the comments were filled with people offering tips, theories, and even leads. That's when it hit me. If no one was talking about Emily, maybe it was because they didn't know about her. So I started an account. My first video was simple. I shared a photo of Emily, talked about the day she disappeared, and showed the note that was left in her car. It didn't get much attention at first, but I kept posting. I made videos about her personality, her dreams of becoming an artist, and even the weird things I'd noticed in the case. Then one video blew up. It was a voicemail Emily had left the night before she disappeared. In the message, her voice was shaky, and she kept whispering like she didn't want someone to hear her. "Mia," she said, "I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens, don't trust him, please." She didn't say who him was, but I didn't have to guess. The video got over 1 million views in just a few days. Suddenly, people were interested in Emily's story. Comments poured in, with theories ranging from a random abduction to something much darker. Some people even started digging into my dad's past, uncovering things I'd never even known. One user pointed out something chilling. In a photo of Emily's car I had posted, there was a reflection in the window. It was faint, but you could see the outline of a man standing a few feet away. The comments about the reflection sent me into a spiral. I couldn't stop staring at that photo, wondering who the man was and what he might have seen. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't need to look outside for answers. The answers had been right in front of me all along, inside my own house. Growing up, my dad had always been a bit intense. He was the kind of guy who kept a gun safe in the living room and a dozen padlocks on the basement door. I used to think he was just paranoid, but after Emily disappeared, his behavior went from weird to downright scary. One night while he was at work, I decided to go into the basement. I knew it was risky. If he caught me, I'd never hear the end of it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was down there. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was musty, like old wood and mildew, but there was something else too, a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. The second thing I noticed was the workbench. It was covered in tools, wires, and what looked like schematics for some kind of homemade device. Then I saw the tapes. There were dozens of them, stacked neatly on a shelf. Most of them were unlabeled, but a few had dates written on them, dates that matched moments in Emily's life. I grabbed the tape marked June 2002 and shoved it into the old VCR hooked up in the corner. The footage was grainy, but I could see Emily. She was in the basement arguing with my dad. She looked scared, her hands trembling as she pointed at him. "You can't control me forever," she yelled. "I'm leaving, and there's nothing you can do about it." I turned off the tape before it could go any further. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I'd always known my dad was hiding something. I just never thought it would be this. After watching that tape, I couldn't look at my dad the same way. Every interaction felt like a game of chess with me trying to figure out his next move. But I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I needed answers, and if he wasn't going to give them to me willingly, I'd have to force his hand. A few days later, I invited him to meet me for coffee at a Starbucks near our house. I brought my phone, hidden in my jacket pocket, with the voice recorder already running. When he showed up, he looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "What's this about, Mia?" he asked, taking a sip of his black coffee. I started off casual, asking how he'd been and if he ever thought about Emily. He shrugged it off, muttering something about how the past is the past. But then I dropped the bombshell. "I went into the basement," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "I saw the tapes." His reaction was immediate. His face turned pale, and he set his coffee cup down with a loud clink. "You had no right to go down there," he snapped. "You had no right to keep her trapped like that," I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. "I saw the tape, Dad. I saw the way she looked at you. What did you do to her?" For a moment, he just stared at me, his hands trembling. Then, in a low voice, he said, "You don't understand. Everything I did to protect this family." "Protect us from what?" I asked, leaning in closer. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked out without another word. I uploaded the recording to TikTok that night. Within hours, it had over 1 million views. People dissected every word, every pause, every inflection in his voice. Some called him a monster. Others said I needed to call the police immediately. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that my dad was hiding something, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. It didn't take long for the video to catch the attention of the police. By the end of the week, detectives were at our house with a warrant to search the basement. They found everything: the tapes, the journals, and something I hadn't even noticed: a hidden compartment under the workbench. Inside was a box containing Emily's necklace, her favorite bracelet, and a lock of her hair. My dad was arrested that same day. The media went wild, calling it the Barnes basement case. People from all over the country followed every update, eager to see justice served. But my dad refused to confess. "You'll never find her," he said during his arraignment, a cold smirk on his face. "You'll never know what really happened." The trial was long and grueling. Prosecutors laid out all the evidence, painting a picture of a controlling father who couldn't handle the thought of losing his daughter. But without Emily's body, it was hard to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. In the end, my dad was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. It wasn't the closure I'd hoped for. There were still so many unanswered questions. Where was Emily? What had really happened that day? And why had my dad done all of this? Even now, I can't stop looking for her. Every night, I go through old case files, read through comments on my TikTok videos, and respond to messages from people who think they might have seen her. Some days, it feels hopeless, but then I remember her voice in that voicemail, begging me not to trust him, and I know I can't give up. Emily deserves justice, and as long as I'm breathing, I'll keep fighting to find it. Moving into Rosewood Avenue in Springfield, Illinois, was supposed to be a fresh start. I needed peace after the chaos of my divorce, a quiet street, friendly neighbors, and the chance to rebuild my life. For the first week, everything seemed perfect. The lawns were neatly trimmed, the mailboxes freshly painted, and the kids played in the streets like it was straight out of a postcard. Across the street from me lived Karen Mitchell. At first glance, she seemed harmless. Your typical suburban mom with her perfectly manicured yard and a dog that barked every morning at 7 a.m. She even waved at me as I unloaded boxes, and I waved back. But soon, I realized Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was an online sensation. I noticed it for the first time on a Tuesday. She stood on her porch, holding her phone, narrating something I couldn't quite hear. I figured she was FaceTiming someone, but the next day I saw her again. Phone in hand, filming everything. Cars driving by, a dog walker picking up after their pet, kids riding their bikes. Then I saw her phone pointed directly at me. I waved awkwardly, but she didn't wave back. Instead, she smiled and kept recording. Later that night, a coworker sent me a link to a TikTok video. It was me, standing in my driveway, unpacking groceries. Karen had added a dramatic zoom effect in text that read, "Grumpy new neighbor." The comments were brutal. Bet he complains about everything. He looks like he hasn't smiled in years. Is this guy even real? I wanted to brush it off, but it got under my skin. The next day, she posted another video, me taking out the trash, then another of me mowing my lawn. Each one had some sarcastic caption, and her followers ate it up. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was infuriating. I'd moved here to escape drama, not become a character in Karen's TikTok show. I told myself it wasn't worth confronting her. People forget TikToks in a day or two, right? But Karen didn't stop. Every day, it was something new. She'd film me walking to my car, sitting on my porch, even having a pizza delivered. The captions were always snarky, and her followers loved it. Who orders pizza this much? Grumpy neighbor strikes again. The worst part was the comments. Strangers from all over the internet chimed in, speculating about my life, my habits, even my mental health. Some people found my address and posted it in the comments. My anxiety was through the roof. I started checking my windows constantly, making sure my blinds were closed, but it didn't matter. Karen always found something new to post. One day, I decided enough was enough. I walked across the street trying to stay calm and knocked on her door. Karen opened it with her phone in hand, already recording. "Hi, neighbor," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What can I do for you?" "Karen, can we talk, like off the record?" I asked, glancing at her phone. She smirked and lowered the phone slightly, but didn't stop recording. "Sure, what's on your mind?" "I've seen your videos," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're making my life really difficult. Strangers are leaving comments about me, posting my address. Can you just stop?" She tilted her head like she was genuinely confused. "Oh, come on. It's all in good fun. My followers love you. You're basically famous now." "I didn't ask to be famous," I shot back. "I just want to live my life in peace." Karen shrugged. It's TikTok, neighbor. Lighten up. People love drama. You should be flattered. Before I could say another word, she raised her phone and said, "Smile for the camera, neighbor. You're going viral again." I walked away before I lost my temper. That night, she posted the video. The comments were worse than ever. Can't believe he actually thought she'd stop. This guy is such a Karen himself. Someone should egg his house. The tension wasn't just online anymore. It was creeping into my real life. My house was egged the next day. A neighbor yelled, "Lighten up," as they walked by. I realized then that this wasn't just an online problem. It was my whole life. The harassment escalated quickly. One evening, I came home to find my mailbox smashed in. The next morning, someone had spray-painted TikTok loser on my driveway. I felt like I was losing control of my life. I called the police, but they barely cared. "It's just online drama," they said. "File a report, but we can't do much without evidence." Karen, meanwhile, was thriving. Her videos were getting more views than ever, and her followers seemed to love how much she could provoke me. She started tagging her posts with phrases like, "Grumpy Neighbor Saga," and "He'll snap soon." I tried to stay calm, but one day she took things too far. I was driving home when she pulled up beside me at a red light. She rolled down her window, phone in hand, and shouted, "Hey neighbor, smile, you're live." I ignored her, but she sped past me, swerving dangerously close to my car. When I got home, she was already outside her house, narrating her side of the story to her phone. "He drives like a maniac," she said, pointing at my car. "Can you believe this guy?" I stormed inside, shaking with anger. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, but confronting her would only make things worse, right? That's what I kept telling myself. 2 nights later, it happened. I was sitting in my living room when I heard shouting outside. I looked out the window and saw Karen, along with a group of her TikTok followers, standing on my lawn. They had cameras, flashlights, and signs that read, "We love Karen." "Come out, neighbor," Karen yelled. "Let's talk this out." I stayed inside, but the shouting got louder. Then I heard something crash against my window, a rock. My heart was pounding as I called the police, but I knew they wouldn't get there in time. I opened the door and stepped outside, hands trembling. "Get off my property," I shouted. Karen turned her camera on me, grinning. "There he is, the grumpy neighbor himself." The crowd cheered, and someone threw another rock, this time hitting my porch light. "I'm warning you," I said, my voice shaking. "Leave, now." But instead of leaving, one of Karen's followers stepped forward, getting right in my face. "What are you gonna do about it?" he sneered. When he shoved me, I snapped. I pushed him back, and suddenly, the whole crowd rushed toward me. I barely had time to react before fists were flying. In the chaos, I saw Karen standing on the sidelines, still filming. "This is gold," she shouted. Then someone grabbed me from behind and I swung instinctively. I didn't realize what I'd done until I saw Karen on the ground, clutching her arm. Blood was pooling on the sidewalk. The crowd went silent. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, he stabbed her." Karen was rushed to the hospital, and I was arrested on the spot. The police didn't care about the months of harassment or the fact that she'd brought a mob to my house. All they saw was the blood and the TikTok videos that made me look like the villain. The next morning, Karen posted from her hospital bed, her arm in a sling. "I just wanted to stand up to my neighbor," she said, fake tears streaming down her face. "I never thought it would come to this." Her followers exploded with sympathy, calling for my head. My name was trending on Twitter, and strangers were leaving death threats on my voicemail. But as the weeks went by, cracks started to show in Karen's story. Lisa, my lawyer, dug up messages where Karen had coordinated the whole thing with her followers. "Let's make him lose it," one message read. "This'll get us to 1 million followers." In court, Lisa laid everything out. The harassment, the vandalism, the mob. Karen's smug confidence shattered as the jury watched video after video of her goading me, twisting the truth, and turning my life into her personal reality show. The verdict was clear: not guilty. Karen was fined for incitement and banned from social media. But even though I won, I didn't feel like a winner. My life was still in ruins. I sold my house, moved to a new city, and deleted every social media account I had. Even now, I can't fully escape it. People still recognize me from Karen's videos, and the memories of that night haunt me. Fame isn't always a blessing. Sometimes it's a curse that ruins everything it touches. TikTok is my guilty pleasure. You can call it an addiction, but for me, it's a window to something more exciting than my dull life in Salem, Massachusetts. I'll spend hours scrolling, lost in everything from cooking hacks to cringy dance videos. It's harmless, right? Or at least it used to be. It started late one night. I was about to close the app and crash when a video popped up on my For You page. The username was Dark Vault, and the thumbnail was just weird. Black and white, grainy, like an old VHS tape. The caption read, "Think you're brave enough? Prove it." I clicked it. Big mistake. The video was nothing like the usual TikTok stuff. It was shot in a dimly lit basement with flickering lights. A guy in a hoodie stood in the corner, silent, his face hidden in shadow. Then a message appeared on the screen in bold red letters. The basement challenge. Light the candles. Finish before the shadows find you. It was unsettling, but I couldn't look away. The comments were flooded with people daring each other to try it. But here's the thing. The people who claimed to have done it, their accounts were gone. I should have scrolled past, but instead I checked out the profile. It had hundreds of videos, all of them darker and creepier than the last. And then I saw the message. A direct DM from Dark Vault. The message was simple. You've been chosen. Think you can handle it? It included an address in Boston, the location of the infamous Shadow House. Locals love to tell ghost stories about it. Disappearances, strange sightings, you name it. I wasn't sure if it was all just hype, but part of me was dying to find out. Against my better judgment, I replied, "What's in it for me?" Almost instantly, I got a response. Money, fame, and the truth. The truth? That got my attention. My life wasn't exactly thrilling, and if I'm honest, I wanted something to shake it up. Maybe I could do the challenge, post the video, and ride the wave of internet fame. What's the worst that could happen, right? So I said yes. The Shadow House was exactly as creepy as I'd imagined. It sat at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by trees that seemed to lean in too close. The windows were boarded up, but the front door was slightly open, like it was waiting for me. I stepped inside and the air was heavy, damp. The smell of mildew hit me like a wall. My phone flashlight barely cut through the darkness, but I kept recording like the instructions said. The comments on my live stream were already blowing up. People were egging me on, calling me brave or stupid. The house creaked with every step. I followed the instructions, head to the basement, find the candles, light them one by one. Simple enough, right? The basement was colder than the rest of the house, like stepping into a freezer. The candles were there, arranged in a circle on the floor, but something felt off. The shadows in the corners didn't stay still. They rippled, like they were alive. I lit the first candle, then the second. The whispers started when I lit the third. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the whispers grew louder, swirling around me. They weren't words, at least not ones I could understand. It was more like a low chant, rising and falling in rhythm with my heartbeat. I froze. My phone screen was glitching, the comments flickering in and out. "Do you hear that?" Someone typed. Another said, "Look behind you." I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, darker than the others, stretching across the floor. It wasn't mine. It moved, creeping closer to the circle of candles. Panicking, I lit the fourth candle, then the fifth. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it made my ears ring. But the shadow didn't disappear. Instead, it rose, taking shape. A figure, tall and hunched, its face obscured. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me. My phone buzzed in my hand. A new notification popped up. "Challenge complete. Stay tuned for your reward." The figure tilted its head, as if amused. Then it lunged. I ran like hell, tripping over the steps as I scrambled out of the basement. The figure's distorted laughter echoed behind me, growing louder with every step. When I burst out of the house, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Slamming the door shut, I locked it and started the engine, but the laughter didn't stop. It was coming from my phone. I threw it onto the passenger seat and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I finally dared to look at the screen, the live stream was still running. The comments were frantic. "It's in your car. Don't stop driving." I glanced in the rear-view mirror, and there it was. The shadowy figure sitting in the back seat, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. Level 2 unlocked. I pulled over, heart pounding, and threw the phone out the window. But the notifications kept coming, buzzing louder and louder. I covered my ears, but the sound was inside my head now. The figure leaned forward, its distorted voice whispering, "You can't leave. You're part of the vault now." Desperate, I grabbed the phone and opened TikTok. The video of my challenge had gone viral, millions of views in minutes. The comments weren't just from random users anymore. They were from accounts that had participated in previous challenges, all of them saying the same thing: run. But there was nowhere to go. The shadows were spreading, leaking out of my phone, curling around my hands, my arms. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the notification, "Congratulations, you're the new king." "You guys ever heard of Randonautica?" Brian asked, scrolling through his phone with a smirk. We were sitting in Lisa's living room on a Saturday afternoon looking for something to do. It was one of those days when we were bored out of our minds but too lazy to do anything too ambitious. Lisa rolled her eyes, Emily raised an eyebrow, and I just shrugged. "It's that app where you think of something, and it sends you to random places based on your intention," he continued. "People say it's creepy as hell sometimes." "Creepy how?" Lisa asked, leaning forward. I could see the spark of curiosity in her eyes. Lisa always loved a good mystery. Emily, on the other hand, didn't look sold. "You mean like TikTok videos where people find weird stuff in the middle of nowhere?" she said, her voice dripping with skepticism. Brian grinned. "Exactly. People have found abandoned buildings, weird objects, even bodies. That got our attention." "Wait, bodies? Like actual dead people?" I asked, half laughing but also a little uneasy. "Isn't that just people faking it for views?" "Not always," Brian said. "Some of it's real. You guys want to try it? Come on, it'll be fun. We'll just think of something harmless like mystery and see where it takes us." I should have known better, but the idea was weirdly exciting. We downloaded the app, and after a bit of fumbling, Brian typed in mystery as our intention. Within seconds, it gave us coordinates. The location, Dead Man Bay on one of the San Juan Islands. "Dead Man Bay?" Emily said, narrowing her eyes. "You've got to be kidding me." "I mean, if that doesn't scream adventure, what does?" Lisa said, laughing nervously. We all looked at each other, the kind of look where no one wants to be the one to chicken out. So we packed some snacks, grabbed a flashlight, and rented a small boat to get us to the island. In hindsight, maybe we should have picked something less ominous. The boat ride to the island was peaceful at first. The water was calm, and the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over everything. Lisa was snapping pictures. Emily was staring out at the horizon, and Brian was messing with the map on his phone. "You guys ever think about how we're literally trusting an app to lead us to God knows what?" Emily said, breaking the silence. "What if it's just leading us to someone's backyard or something?" "Relax, Emily," Brian said. "It's not like we're trespassing. It's a public beach. Worst case, we find some driftwood and call it a day." When we docked, something felt off. The air was heavier here, almost too still. The usual sounds of nature, birds, rustling leaves, were missing. The only sound was the faint crashing of waves in the distance. I shook off the unease as we followed the app's directions, which led us into a dense patch of trees. The trail was barely visible, overgrown with weeds and branches. "This doesn't feel like a beach trail," Lisa muttered, brushing a cobweb out of her face. The deeper we went, the darker it got, even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. It was like the trees themselves were swallowing the light. When we finally broke through the trees and stepped onto the rocky beach, Deadman Bay lived up to its name. The shoreline was jagged and unwelcoming, littered with old driftwood and seaweed. And then, we saw it. A black suitcase lying partially buried in the sand. At first, no one said a word. We just stared at it, the way you would at something that felt both out of place and undeniably wrong. Brian was the first to move, walking toward it with an exaggerated swagger. "Jackpot," he joked. "Bet it's full of gold bars." Emily grabbed his arm. "Don't. What if it's something bad?" "It's just a suitcase, Emily," Lisa said, though her voice wavered. "What's the worst it could be?" Brian knelt down and unzipped it. The smell hit us first, this sickening metallic stench that made my stomach churn. Brian gagged and stumbled back, his face pale. Inside, wrapped in what looked like bloody fabric, was something human. Emily screamed. Lisa froze, her hand covering her mouth. I could barely process what I was seeing. The world seemed to tilt, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then the realization hit us. We weren't alone. We didn't wait around to see more. Brian zipped the suitcase back up, his hands shaking, and we all took off running toward the trees. The air felt heavier now, like it was pressing down on us, making it harder to breathe. Emily was sobbing. Lisa was muttering something under her breath, and Brian kept looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to look back. I didn't want to know if someone, or something, was behind us. The trail back to the boat felt longer this time, like it was stretching out just to mess with us. Every sound, a branch snapping, leaves rustling, felt amplified, like it was coming from right behind me. My brain kept screaming at me to keep moving, but my legs felt like they were made of concrete. When we finally broke through the tree line and reached the dock, my heart sank. The boat was still there, but something was wrong. One of the oars was missing, and the motor looked like it had been tampered with. "What the hell?" Brian shouted, running toward the boat. He started frantically checking the motor, muttering curses under his breath. "It's busted. Someone messed with it." "Someone's here," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. She was clutching Lisa's arm, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. "They're watching us." "I don't see anyone," Lisa said, though she didn't sound convinced. She pulled out her phone and waved it around, trying to get a signal. "Still no service. We're stuck." Brian threw the remaining oar down in frustration. "We can't stay here. We need to figure something out. If whoever did this comes back..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew what he was thinking. I glanced back toward the trees, and that's when I saw it. A faint glimmer of something metallic on the ground. I walked over and picked it up. It was a brooch, old and tarnished, with the initials JH engraved on it. "Guys, look at this," I said, holding it up. "It's weird, right?" Brian barely glanced at it. "I don't care about some stupid brooch. We need to focus on getting out of here." He was right. But something about the brooch didn't sit right with me. It felt important, like a piece of a puzzle we didn't even know we were trying to solve. We decided to try fixing the motor with whatever we could find in the boat's small storage compartment. Brian and I worked on it while Lisa and Emily kept watch. The sun was almost gone now, and the shadows were getting longer, stretching across the beach like claws. Every few minutes, I'd catch Lisa or Emily glancing nervously toward the trees. None of us wanted to admit it, but we all felt it. We were being watched. After what felt like an eternity, Brian managed to rig the motor enough to get it working. "It's not perfect," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "but it should get us back." We all piled into the boat and Brian started the motor. The sound of it roaring to life was the most comforting thing I'd heard all day. As we pulled away from the shore, I looked back at the beach one last time. That's when I saw them. 2 figures standing at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the fading light. They weren't moving, just watching. "Go faster," I said, my voice cracking. Brian didn't need to be told twice. He pushed the motor as hard as it would go, and the island started to fade into the distance. But even as the figures disappeared from view, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. When we finally reached the mainland, we didn't waste any time. We drove straight to the nearest police station and told them everything. The suitcase, the smell, the figures on the beach. The officers looked skeptical at first, but when we mentioned Deadman Bay, something in their demeanor shifted. One of them, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, leaned forward. "You're not the first ones to report something strange out there," he said. "We'll send a team to investigate." That should have been the end of it. We should have gone home and tried to forget everything. But a few days later, I got a phone call that changed everything. The call came late at night, just as I was starting to convince myself that maybe it was over. The police officer from the station, the one with the tired eyes, was on the other end. His voice was low and serious. "We found the suitcase and the remains," he said. "But there's more to this. We need you to come in." I didn't want to go, but something told me I needed to hear what he had to say. The next morning, I met him at the station. He handed me a file with pictures I wish I could unsee. The suitcase, the bloody fabric, and detailed reports of what they found. The victims were 2 women, Emily Harper and Julia Hughes, both reported missing weeks ago. They were whistleblowers, the officer explained, worked for a company involved in some shady deals. They'd reported it to the authorities before disappearing. We think someone wanted to silence them. The brooch I'd found on the beach? It belonged to Julia Hughes, one of the victims. My stomach turned as I realized it had been placed there deliberately, like a breadcrumb. But by who and why? Then the officer leaned in, his expression grim. "There's something else. We found more remains in the area, buried deeper into the woods. Whoever did this didn't act alone. This was organized." The revelation left me shaken. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled into something much bigger than we'd imagined. As I drove home, I noticed a car behind me, keeping pace. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but when I pulled into my driveway and the car slowly rolled past, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man in a dark hoodie with piercing eyes. He stared at me for a moment before driving off. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying everything in my head. The suitcase, the figures on the beach, the brooch. It felt like a warning. And then, around 3 a.m., I heard something outside my window. Footsteps. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound of footsteps grew louder, circling the house. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling, and called Brian. He picked up after a few rings, groggy but alert. "Dude, someone's outside my house," I whispered. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tightening. "Did you call the cops?" Before I could answer, there was a loud thunk on my front door, like someone was trying to force it open. I bolted to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. But when I opened it, I found an envelope taped to the wood. My hands shook as I ripped it open. Inside were photographs, pictures of us at Deadman Bay. There was one of Brian opening the suitcase, another of Lisa staring at the contents, and one of me holding the brooch, but the last picture chilled me to the bone. It was taken through my bedroom window of me sleeping. There was a note, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You should have left it alone." I stumbled back, the photos falling to the floor. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of anyone. Just the photos and the note, as if to mock me. The next few days were a blur. I stopped sleeping, jumping at every noise, every shadow. I tried to convince myself it was over, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The brooch, the beach, the figures. We'd uncovered something we were never meant to find. And then, one night, as I sat in my living room, I saw it. A shadow outside my window. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but when I looked back, it was gone. To this day, I don't know who or what it was. All I know is that some doors are meant to stay closed. And sometimes curiosity doesn't just kill the cat, it comes for you too. I wasn't really into TikTok at first. Honestly, I thought it was just a bunch of dances and pranks. But then, one night, I found myself mindlessly scrolling. You know, just passing time. That's when I stumbled across it. A video with this heavy, haunting beat. It hit different, like it crawled under your skin. The caption read, "You've been chosen." Drill curse. At first I laughed. It seemed like one of those gimmicky horror trends, just something people cooked up to go viral. The rapper in the video, Ghost Reaper, had this intimidating presence. He wore a black hoodie standing in this dimly lit alley, his face half covered by shadows. His voice was gravelly, deep and raw, spitting out violent lyrics. The sound was addictive. I replayed it at least 5 times, but something felt off. In the background of the video, you could hear faint whispers, like they weren't part of the song. They sounded too real, too close. And then there were those shadows behind him. They moved, but he didn't. I figured it was just a creepy filter or something. The comments section was blowing up. People were saying things like, "Don't share this or you'll regret it," and "If you hear the beat outside of TikTok, run." I thought it was all part of the act, like some edgy marketing. But the curiosity, it got to me. I left a comment. "Pretty sick beat. What's the curse about?" Right after that, my phone started glitching. My screen flickered and TikTok froze. When I tried to reopen the app, the video was gone. Not just the video, Ghost Reaper's entire profile vanished like it had never been there. I brushed it off as a coincidence. Phones glitch all the time, right? But deep down, something didn't sit right. And when I went to sleep that night, the beat of that song, it wouldn't leave my head. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy, like I hadn't slept at all. My room was eerily quiet, but I swore I could still hear that damn beat somewhere, faint but persistent. I chalked it up to my brain being stuck on the song, like when you hear something catchy. But this wasn't catchy. It was unsettling. I grabbed my phone and tried to look up Ghost Reaper again. Nothing. No profile, no videos, no mentions. It was like he never existed. I even searched on Reddit, and the few threads I found were weird. People were claiming the same thing. They saw his video, interacted with it, and then it disappeared. But what freaked me out the most were the stories. One guy said he started seeing shadows in his house after commenting on a Ghost Reaper video. Another claimed his little brother woke up screaming, saying someone was standing at the foot of his bed. And then there was this girl who posted that she heard the beat playing from her closet in the middle of the night. I'm not gonna lie, it started getting to me. Every little sound in my house felt louder. Shadows seemed darker. My sister, who's 10, even asked me why I kept playing that scary music in my room. I wasn't playing anything. That night, I tried to shake it off. I put on some music to distract myself, but halfway through my headphones cut out. Silence. And then, faintly, I heard it again. The beat. It wasn't coming from my phone. It felt like it was in the walls. I froze. My heart was pounding, and I swear I could feel someone watching me. That's when I noticed my window was open. I don't remember leaving it open. When I got up to close it, I saw something move in the reflection. A shadow, but there was no one behind me. I didn't sleep much after that. My brain was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was I imagining all of this? Maybe I'd fallen into some elaborate TikTok hoax. But deep down, it felt real. Too real. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. If Ghost Reaper wasn't on TikTok anymore, maybe someone else had archived his videos. I scoured YouTube, Instagram, Reddit, anywhere people might have shared his stuff. That's when I found a post buried in an obscure forum. It was a thread titled, "Ghost Reaper Videos, Do Not Watch." The OP claimed to have saved one of the original videos before TikTok removed it. They uploaded a grainy clip with a warning, "Don't play this out loud. Seriously." I hit play anyway. It was the same alley from the video I saw before, but this one was worse. Ghost Reaper's lyrics were more aggressive, like he was taunting someone. The shadows behind him, they weren't just moving, they were reaching, grabbing. And the whispers, they sounded like screams, muffled and distorted. My chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I paused the video, but the whispers didn't stop. They lingered, faint but there, like they'd crawled out of the screen and into my head. I scrolled down the thread, hoping someone had an explanation. Most of the replies were people sharing similar experiences. Shadows, whispers, the beat playing when they were alone. But one comment stood out. "If you've seen the video, the only way to break the curse is to go to where it was filmed. Don't ignore this. The longer you wait, the worse it gets." They mentioned the location, a back alley near Union Station in Chicago. It clicked. The graffiti in the video, the layout, it all lined up. I didn't want to believe it, but after what I'd experienced, I couldn't ignore it either. If this was a curse, I needed to end it. By the time I decided to make the trip to Chicago, the whispers had become relentless. They followed me everywhere. At home, at school, even in broad daylight. And the beat? It was like my own personal soundtrack looping endlessly in the back of my mind. I didn't tell anyone what was going on. How could I? "Hey, I think I'm cursed by a dead rapper on TikTok." Didn't exactly sound believable. So I made up some excuse about visiting a friend and hopped on a Greyhound bus to Chicago. The ride was long, and the closer I got to the city, the heavier the air felt. It was like the curse knew I was trying to break it and didn't want me to. I kept checking my phone, but every time I tried to look up more about Ghost Reaper, my browser would freeze or the page would load blank. When I finally arrived, it was late evening. The streets were busy, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I followed the directions from the forum, weaving through the city until I found myself standing at the entrance of that alley. It looked exactly like the video. The same graffiti, the same broken streetlight flickering above. The air was colder here, sharper, like it didn't belong. And that's when I heard it, faint but unmistakable. The beat. It wasn't coming from my head this time. It was real, echoing from deep within the alley. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to forget all of this, but I couldn't. If I didn't face this now, I knew it would follow me forever. So I took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness. The alley swallowed me whole. With every step, the world behind me felt further away, like I was crossing some invisible line into a place I wasn't supposed to be. The flickering streetlight at the entrance was the only source of light, and even that felt like it was fading the deeper I went. The beat grew louder. It wasn't coming from a speaker. It was coming from everywhere. It vibrated through the walls, through the ground, through my chest. It was the same beat from the video, but there was something different about it now. It felt alive. As I moved further in, the shadows shifted. At first I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but then one of them darted across the wall like it had a mind of its own. My breath hitched. This wasn't just some spooky vibe. There was something in here with me. I tried to convince myself it was just the adrenaline messing with my head, but then I heard it. A whisper. "Why did you come here?" The voice was low, almost guttural, like it wasn't meant to be heard by human ears. I froze, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Then I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, right where Ghost Reaper had stood in the video. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its face was obscured, but its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. It wore a hoodie, the same as in the video, but the edges of its body flickered, like static on a TV screen. "You shouldn't have watched," it said, its voice echoing, overlapping like a chorus of whispers. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. What do you want from me?" I stammered, my voice barely louder than a whisper. The figure tilted its head. the glowing embers of its eyes narrowing. You watched, you listened, you shared. Now, you pay. The shadows around it began to writhe, stretching across the alley like black tendrils. They snaked toward me, curling around my legs and arms, pulling me closer. I tried to fight, but it was like struggling against quicksand. The harder I fought, the stronger they got. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, forming a chaotic symphony of voices that drilled into my skull. I could make out fragments of words: betrayal, revenge, curse. Then it hit me. The curse wasn't random. It wasn't just some viral gimmick. It was personal. Ghost Reaper had been betrayed, killed by people he trusted, and now his spirit was using his music to exact vengeance. But why me? I didn't know him. I didn't betray him. "Please," I shouted, my voice breaking. "I didn't do anything to you." The figure stopped, its head tilting again like it was considering my words. Then, in a voice that was colder than the air around me, it said, "You didn't, but you kept it alive." I realized what it meant. By watching, by commenting, by engaging with the video, I had fed the curse. Every view, every share, every interaction gave it more power. I was about to say something, anything, but before I could, the shadows surged, dragging me into the ground. The last thing I saw was its burning eyes staring down at me as everything went black. I woke up to the sound of a siren. My head was pounding, and my entire body ached like I'd been hit by a truck. When I opened my eyes, I realized I wasn't in the alley anymore. I was lying on a bench near Union Station, surrounded by concerned bystanders. A paramedic was kneeling beside me, asking if I was okay. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw. When I finally managed to get a word out, all I could say was, "The alley. What happened?" The paramedic gave me a confused look. "What alley? Someone found you passed out here. They said you were mumbling about shadows." I looked around, trying to piece everything together. The alley was gone. Or maybe it had never been there in the first place. But the whispers hadn't stopped. They were quieter now, more distant, but they were still there, lingering at the edge of my mind. And the beat? It was still playing. When I checked my phone, the screen was blank. No apps, no notifications, just the faint reflection of my face staring back at me. That's when I saw it. A shadow standing just behind me in the reflection. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I don't know if the curse is broken, or if it's just waiting for me to slip up again. But if you're reading this, take my advice. If you ever see a video of Ghost Reaper, don't watch it, don't comment, don't share. Because once you let it in, it never really leaves. It started when I was scrolling through TikTok late one night, the way I always do when I can't sleep. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just mindlessly swiping through videos when I noticed something odd. In the comments of a random video, there were these accounts, completely anonymous, no profile pics, no bios, posting the same word over and over, Neri. At first I didn't think much of it. People spam random stuff all the time, right? But then I saw it again, and again. Different videos, different creators, same word. It wasn't even a trending video. Some were just boring clips of people walking their dogs or filming their meals. So, what was up with that? Curiosity got the better of me. I copied one of the comments, opened the TikTok translator, and pasted it in. The response sent a chill straight down my spine. The translation came back as, "They're suffering." I just stared at my screen. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe TikTok's translator was buggy, I told myself. But the comments didn't stop there. In another video, I found Neri again, only this time when I translated it, it said, "Help me." Okay, now I was officially creeped out. It wasn't just the translation, it was the tone of it. Desperate, painful, like someone was actually crying for help. I made a video about it, just a quick post explaining what I found. I didn't think it would blow up, but it did. Overnight, my notifications were swamped with people saying they'd seen the same thing. Some said they tried the translation too, and got stuff like, "They can't escape," or "I can't breathe." Others swore the comments had disappeared after they translated them. It wasn't just me. Something weird was definitely going on. The next night, I decided to dig deeper. If this was just some kind of prank or trend, there had to be an explanation. But things only got stranger. I found another Neary comment, but when I tried to translate it, the app froze. My screen turned black for a second, then came back on with a new message. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. It felt personal, like someone or something knew I was looking. My apartment was dead silent except for the faint hum of my phone. Then I heard it. A knock. Not on my front door, on the wall. My stomach sank. The apartment next to mine had been empty for weeks. I knew because the landlord mentioned renovations were delayed. There shouldn't have been anyone there. I put my phone down, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the pipes, maybe the building settling. But when I picked my phone back up, there was a new comment waiting for me on TikTok. "Stop looking." I barely slept that night. Every little sound in my apartment felt louder, sharper, like the silence was holding its breath. I kept telling myself it was just a prank, someone hacked the app or something, but deep down I knew it was more than that. The next morning I decided to do what any rational person would do, Google it. I typed Neary TikTok comments into the search bar and scrolled through pages of conspiracy theories, Reddit threads, and even some blog posts. Most people thought it was just a weird internet hoax, but then I found an obscure forum discussing something that caught my attention. According to one post, Neary wasn't just gibberish. It was tied to an ancient language spoken by a now extinct tribe in New England. The language had been lost for centuries, but fragments of it were preserved in folklore. The post claimed Neary, loosely translated to witness, or to cry out. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The comments weren't random, they had meaning, and they were starting to feel targeted. So I decided to investigate further. Salem, Massachusetts popped into my mind, famous for witches, hauntings, and all sorts of paranormal stuff. It was only a few hours' drive from New York, so I packed a bag and hit the road. The trip was uneventful at first, but then my car radio started acting up. The music cut out, replaced by static. No big deal. I figured it was just bad reception. But then, through the crackling noise, I heard a voice. "Don't go." I slammed the brakes, my heart racing. I looked around the empty highway, half expecting to see someone standing in the road. But there was nothing. Just me, the car, and miles of empty asphalt. I turned the radio off and kept driving, trying to ignore the chill creeping up my spine. When I got to Salem, I reached out to a linguistics professor I found online. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Pierce, and she specialized in dead languages and folklore. She agreed to meet me at a small cafe downtown. She was older, with sharp eyes that made you feel like she could see right through you. I explained everything. Well, most of it. I left out the part about the knocks in the radio. I didn't want her to think I was losing it. She listened carefully, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Neary isn't just a word," she said. "It's a connection. In some legends, it's said to be the cry of a spirit that witnessed something horrific but couldn't act. These spirits are called witnesses. They're trapped in their pain, desperate to warn others or share their suffering." "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm. "But why TikTok? Why now?" Dr. Pierce leaned in closer. "Spirits adapt. They find the easiest way to communicate. Social media reaches millions of people instantly. What better way to spread their message?" I sat back, trying to process what she was saying. Was I really dealing with some kind of spirit using TikTok to cry for help? It sounded insane, but the pieces were starting to fit. As I thanked her and got up to leave, she grabbed my wrist. "Be careful," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The more you interact with it, the stronger the connection becomes." That night, back at my motel, I couldn't shake her warning. I turned off my phone and set it face down on the nightstand. But even with the screen off, I swear I saw something reflected on its surface. Letters forming the word Neri. Back in my apartment, the unease from Salem followed me like a shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I glanced at my phone, I half expected to see another Neri comment or translation pop up. For a while, I resisted the urge to open TikTok. I figured if I ignored it, the connection would weaken. Theater. Pierce's warning echoed in my head, but curiosity has always been my downfall. It didn't take long for the app to pull me back in. Late one night, I gave in and opened TikTok. My feed was quiet at first, the usual mix of dancing videos and cooking tutorials. But then it happened again. A new comment on one of my own posts. You opened the door. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. I clicked on the account, but like all the others, it was blank. No videos, no followers, just the same eerie emptiness. Against my better judgment, I copied the comment and pasted it into the translator. The response chilled me to my core. Now you will see. The air in my apartment shifted. It was subtle at first, like the room got just a few degrees colder. Then the lights flickered, and the hum of the refrigerator stopped. The silence was deafening. My phone screen went black for a moment, and when it came back on, I wasn't looking at TikTok anymore. It was my own reflection staring back at me. But something was wrong. The face on the screen wasn't me. Not really. The eyes were hollow, darker than they should have been. The mouth moved, but I wasn't speaking. You shouldn't have looked, it whispered, the voice barely audible but undeniably mine. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. The reflection disappeared as soon as the device hit the floor. The screen was cracked, but the faint outline of the word Neri still glowed through the fractures. A sudden knock at the door made me jump. It wasn't just any knock. It was deliberate, rhythmic, and all too familiar. The same sound I'd heard that night from the empty apartment next door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knock came again, louder this time. Slowly, I stepped toward the door, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper. There was no answer, just the sound of something being slid under the door. I hesitated, then bent down to pick it up. It was a note, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You let them in." The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, I wasn't alone. Standing in the corner of the room was a figure, a shadowy, indistinct shape with piercing eyes that seemed to burn right through me. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there watching. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body refused to obey. My phone buzzed on the floor, pulling my attention away for just a second. When I looked back up, the figure was gone. The phone kept buzzing, the screen lighting up with notifications. I forced myself to pick it up. The cracks on the screen distorted the words, but I could still make them out. "Keep spreading the word." I threw the phone across the room, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Now everywhere I go, I see it. In reflections, in shadows, even in the faces of strangers on the subway. The witness isn't just watching, it's following me. And the worst part? My videos haven't stopped going viral. Every day, more people comment, more people translate, and more people open the door. If you're reading this, do yourself a favor. Stay off TikTok. You don't want to see what I've seen.